With few exceptions, the Middle East has become a depository for US presidential ideas, particularly big ones. Recognizing this harsh reality, US President Joe Biden's administration avoided the region the last year and a half. Saudi Arabia and Israel adding to confusion over his Middle East policies. Welcome back to the Middle East North Africa map, everyone. Curious to know what you can expect on energy costs and inflation? Join us as we dive into everything you need to know about Biden's Middle East trip. Let's find out. The Biden administration has a good chance of facilitating progress in Israel's new relationships with Saudi Arabia and other Persian Gulf states. However, Biden's priorities are elsewhere, and he will be right to be wary of making deep commitments that could drag the US into a dysfunctional and disorderly region, which is likely to remain so for years. Israel and the Arab world will accept whatever the US president has to offer, but they are acutely aware of his dwindling political currency and have begun to look beyond him for the return of the former US president Donald Trump or his avatar. US presidential visits to the Middle East have taken various forms. Biden's upcoming trip to the region, prompted initially by now former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett's invitation, is largely motivated by a domestic political crisis in the United States linked to the price of oil. The group of oil-producing countries known as OPEC+, which includes Russia and Saudi Arabia, agreed in 2020 to cut production in order to reverse the price drop caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. As prices began to rise, OPEC+ producers began to reverse their production cuts. However, the initial wave of cuts collided with rising demands, while the Ukraine war disrupted supply. Energy prices have skyrocketed, driving inflation in the United States and eviscerating Biden's domestic political position ahead of the midterm elections in the United States. Thus, the pressing need to pay court to the pariah. However, oil traders have already factored in the ongoing loosening of supply restrictions in the price of energy, and Saudi commitments to pump more oil in response to Biden's visit are too small to lower the price at the pump in the short term. Furthermore, energy analysts predict that global demand will outstrip supply in the long run. If that trend continues, sustained high prices are baked into the world's economic future, and relatively minor adjustments made by the Saudis in exchange for US favors won't bring much comfort to ordinary Americans. Meanwhile, Washington and its allies are debating US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen's proposal to cap Russian oil prices. One thing is certain about the crisis that is driving Biden to the Gulf. Fossil fuel consumption is receiving a boost that will push an energy transition into the indefinite future. The trust of Biden's visit may yield minor political benefits now, but they will come at a much more serious, albeit delayed, environmental cost. Biden's stop in Israel is perhaps the easiest lift of the trip, though it is far from simple. He was not going to make the same mistake as his former boss, former US President Barack Obama, by failing to visit Israel early in his presidency, or worse, traveling to the region without stopping in Israel. The Bennett-led government of change, on which Biden appeared to have bet, as evidenced by his avoidance of pressuring it on settlements or anything else for fear of former Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's return, has now collapsed. Biden will almost certainly discuss the US's unbreakable bond with Israel and the US's deep commitment to Israeli security. In his inaugural address, Lapid condemned extremism, reached out to Palestinians, and warned Iran. These are the themes on which Biden can build. Prime Minister Yair Lapid may use the opportunity to press Israeli requests for funding for laser air defenses, as well as aircraft and munitions that would allow Israel to attack Iran on its own. If Lapid goes this route, Biden will most likely defer. Both of his recent predecessors turned down requests for bombers and bunker bursters, fearing that Israel would start a fight it couldn't finish, dragging the US into a war it didn't want. As is customary, Biden will meet with Netanyahu as the leader of Israel's opposition. They've known each other for decades, but the happy talk will mask the fact that Biden is not looking forward to the return of Netanyahu, who humiliated him during Obama's first term in office. And for his part, Netanyahu clearly hopes Trump will succeed Biden. The meeting is merely a courtesy, and given the upcoming elections, it will serve to emphasize Biden's lack of favoritism. Expect lots of hand-holding and forced smiles, but not much else. Biden's meeting with Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas is mandatory. Biden will pretend that his administration is actually concerned about the Palestinian issue, emphasizing the importance of confidence-building measures and support for a two-state solution. Abbas will politely pretend that he has any hope of resuming a political process addressing Palestinian national aspirations for an independent state with agreed-upon borders and a capital in East Jerusalem. He will question the US president about settlements and why he is delaying the reopening of the US consulate in Jerusalem. In turn, Biden will press the Palestinians to combat terrorism and end PA support for families of Palestinians imprisoned for acts of violence and terror against Israelis. The meeting will, at best, be long on intentions and short on results. The only truly strategic issue that will plague Biden's talks in both Israel and Saudi Arabia is Iran. Saudi Arabia and possibly Israel would love nothing more than to see the US annihilate Iran. If that fails, Riyadh is likely to be convinced that the next Republican administration will do as Trump did and sever a reconstituted nuclear deal if Biden is able to do so. Meanwhile, the Saudis are taking precautions. They, like the UAE, have reached out to Iran in order to normalize relations and put a stop to Houthi missile launches from Yemen. Nonetheless, the Saudis will press Washington on what it will do if Iran attacks Saudi Arabia. However, Biden should be extremely cautious about making any binding security commitments that could lead the US into a war with Iran on Saudi. Meanwhile, Israel is conducting not-so-covert operations to undermine Iran's desire to reinstate the deal that Trump rejected. What would a stronger defense relationship between the United States and Saudi Arabia look like? Apart from the Middle East Air Defense Alliance, which was launched last year at a meeting of senior US, Israeli, and Gulf Arab officers, the options are numerous. At the extreme, Biden could offer the Saudis a legally binding guarantee that the US would defend them if they were attacked by Iran. In theory, such an agreement would require Senate approval in the United States, but in practice, it would not. These pacts are uncommon because they limit signatories' flexibility in a crisis or changing strategic circumstances. Furthermore, public support for the US-Saudi relationship is brittle in the US, and a formal defense commitment would attract unwanted attention from critics. At the very least, Biden could propose a defense cooperation agreement in which the US commits to consultations if the Saudis are attacked. This would be a significant expression of US interest and intent, but it would not commit Washington to immediate intervention. This is the type of agreement that the US already has with the other GCC countries. There isn't one with Saudi Arabia because it refused one in the 1990s and expelled the US negotiating team. Mohammed bin Salman's thinking, like so many other things, differs sharply from that of the old guard. Despite the Biden administration's efforts to persuade these states that America is not abandoning the region, locals know better, or believe they do. Regardless of these gloomy predictions, Saudi Arabia's desire for a continued US military presence in the region will be met for the foreseeable future. The US maintains a complex basing structure in the Persian Gulf, with the 5th Fleet based in Bahrain, the Combined Air Operations Center based at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, another sprawling airbase in the UAE, and war material stored in Oman and Kuwait. US forces are routinely deployed to these sites. These bases will remain in place as long as Iran remains an adversary and the price of oil remains an important factor in a globalized economy. If there is a silver lining in this cloud, it is that the United States' risk aversion has encouraged Gulf Arab countries and Israel to reach out to each other for collective security. The US incubated them and protected them as they matured into regional powers, which they now see themselves as. Empty nest syndrome can result in over-involvement in the lives of one's children. As President Biden makes his first trip to the Middle East, he may be able to resist this temptation. And with that being said, it's time to end our video. But before that, we'd like to know what are your views about this. Like this video and make sure to subscribe to the channel for more interesting videos like this. We'll see you in the next video.